It was the 16th of March 1984. Camera crews and journalists filled the arrivals hall at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport in Louisiana, eagerly awaiting the arrival of Jeffrey Doucet. 2 weeks earlier, in California, Doucet had been arrested for the abduction and molestation of a young boy, a case that had quickly captured national attention. Now he's returning to the victim's hometown to face trial for his crimes. At around 9:30 p.m., Doucet appeared. Handcuffed and flanked by police, he was guided through the terminal toward the gathering reporters. Then, in an instant, chaos erupted. In a flash, Doucet had crumpled to the ground, blood streaming from his ear. He'd been shot in the head, and his attacker stood over him, identifiable by a white baseball cap and dark sunglasses. It was Gary Plauché, the father of the boy Doucet had abducted. Clutched in his hand was a Smith & Wesson .38 snub-nosed revolver, with which Plauché strode up to his son's tormentor and fired a single fatal shot straight into his brain. Plauché was promptly accosted by the police, while Doucet slipped into a coma. Amid the chaos, the words of the officer forced to arrest Plauché echoed throughout the stunned hall as he shouted, "Why, Gary? Why?" The Plauché family were natives of Baton Rouge, where Jody was born in 1972 to Leon Gary Plauché and June Sheridan. In Baton Rouge, the Plauchés led a relatively normal middle-class life in the Pelican State. Leon Gary, usually simply known as Gary, was a devoted father who worked tirelessly as a traveling equipment salesman to provide for his family after serving in the U.S. Air Force. Together with his wife, they raised several children, including Jody, in a loving yet traditional Southern household. Jody was an active and energetic child who, like many kids his age, participated in sports and various extracurricular activities. His parents encouraged him to try karate, leading to him to train at a local studio under the guidance of an instructor, Jeffrey Doucet. As Jody began to excel in the martial art, the Plauchés grew to trust Doucet, seeing him as a positive role model for their son. They even invited him to their family home on several occasions, and at times he would even stay overnight. Such was the level of trust and admiration that they held for his mentor. Jody later revealed that his father also felt a genuine sense of pity for Doucet, who primarily resided at the karate studio. Gary Plauché considered Doucet's living situation pitiful, and he had even arranged once for Doucet to spend a night at his own parents' house. Behind the scenes, however, Doucet was far from a role model. For months, he groomed and sexually abused 11-year-old Jody, often at the studio or in motels while attending competitions, and sometimes even in the presence of others. Over time, the abuse intensified, until Doucet began subjecting the boy to daily harm, and his depravity was about to take another dark turn. On Valentine's Day, 1984, Doucet abducted Jody. He coaxed the boy to his new home with the Plauchés' knowledge, under the pretense of showing him some new upholstery that he had installed. The trust that Gary and June placed in their son's instructor led them to see no cause for concern. Instead, Doucet drove Jody across state lines to Anaheim, California, where he confined the boy in a motel and continued to sexually abuse him. This ordeal stretched on for weeks, all while the Plauchés frantically searched for their son. Jody was held for 10 days in Anaheim, during which Doucet took him to see Disneyland and the Hollywood sign. According to Jody, while Doucet's abuse continued, there were noticeable signs of nervousness, and he seemed more constrained than he had been previously. When the boy begged to contact his mother, Doucet, perhaps overwhelmed by his own nerves, agreed. Running low on money, Doucet foolishly had the boy place a collect call to Louisiana, with the receiver bearing the cost. By that time, the FBI, now working with the Plauchés, immediately traced the origin of the call, and California police promptly closed in on the Samoa motel where Doucet had sequestered them. Only moments after Jody hung up, police smashed through the motel room door. Doucet was promptly arrested while Jody was freed. The kidnapper was held by the Orange County Police Department, processed, and then scheduled for transfer back to Louisiana, where he would face arraignment in Baton Rouge. Meanwhile, as Doucet underwent processing in Orange County, Jody was sent home to be reunited with his parents. He arrived back in Louisiana the day after his rescue. But the story, of course, was far from over. The boy who embraced his parents at the airport appeared distant and detached. Adult Jody later recalled his listless embrace at the airport, revealing that he had been under the emotional control of his captor and scarred by the shock and awe raid that had liberated him. He was also overwhelmed by the presence of television crews filming his return. Perhaps as a consequence of Doucet's influence, Jody told his parents that he had not been abused by his kidnapper, a claim he also made to the California police while insisting that his parents knew where he was. Yet troubling signs were evident. In addition to his shaken, absent demeanor, Jody looked physically different. Doucet had dyed the boy's hair black to prevent his recognition and had informed anyone who inquired that Jody was his son. Before being sent home, Jody was assessed by medical staff in California. A rape kit later provided evidence of the abuse he suffered at the hands of Doucet. The news eventually found its way back to Gary, and Doucet's days, well, they were numbered. When the boy was reunited with his parents, reporters from the local news station, WBRZ, interviewed Gary Plauché. Although his family's anxiety and fear were evident, Gary appeared calm and composed. When asked if he'd learned anything from the experience, he simply replied, "I guess just how much I love my children." Few who watched the broadcast realized the smoldering fury that lay beneath Gary's calm exterior. As the details of his son's abuse emerged, it is said that Gary was overwhelmed by fury, despair, and undoubtedly a certain degree of guilt. He had felt pity for Jeffrey Doucet and welcomed him into his home, believing him to be both a positive influence on his son and a struggling young man in need of assistance. This was a man he had entrusted with teaching Jody self-defense, only for him to take advantage of the boy in the most malevolent and wicked manner. Moreover, the abuse occurred over many months, with Doucet frequently taking Jody on trips to out-of-state karate meets with his parents' consent. Jody later stated that he was his father's favorite child, and that Gary had taken immense pride in his sporting achievements, a fact that perhaps dulled his awareness of the crimes being committed against his son by his instructor. On one of these karate trips, Doucet had dropped Jody off with Gary's brother after a competition in Dallas. Gary's brother reported that he had seen Doucet kiss 11-year-old Jody on the mouth, though Gary dismissed the allegation. Adding to the complexity of the situation, in the summer of 1983, while the abuse was still ongoing and several months before Jody's abduction, Gary and June divorced. Gary later realized that the chaos of that period had given Doucet even more unsupervised time with his son, allowing him greater freedom to carry out his depraved acts, while the Plauchés' attention was on other matters. Jody recounted that his father had worked part-time for the news station WBRZ and was a regular drinking companion of several of its executives. He was also close with members of the Baton Rouge Police Department and had attended school with lead investigator Mike Barnett. Initially, it was believed that one of the investigators had shared details of Doucet's transfer back to Louisiana with Gary. One way or another, once Gary discovered that his son's abuser was due to return, he put together a plan for decisive retribution. On March 16, 1984, 2 weeks after his arrest, Doucet was flown back to Louisiana to face trial. While in transit, he allegedly confessed to detectives Bud Connor and Mike Barnett, who accompanied him, that Jody was not his only victim. He admitted to abusing other young boys as well, and claimed he couldn't recall either the frequency or the names of everyone that he had harmed. Later, while in Anaheim during a phone call with June, Doucet ordered her to meet him in New York. He threatened that if she did not comply, she would never see her son again. This call proved to be a grave mistake, as it automatically elevated his charge from kidnapping to aggravated kidnapping, a charge carrying a mandatory life sentence. Ironically, Jeffrey Doucet would not live long enough to serve a single day of what would become an inevitable sentence. Doucet and the police escort arrived at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport shortly after 9 p.m., and he was led, handcuffed, into the terminal. By 9:30, the group had entered the arrivals area, where, unbeknownst to both Doucet and the police, Gary Plauché lay in wait. It was later revealed that an executive at WBRZ, the same outlet that had interviewed the Plauchés following their son's rescue, had let slip to Gary the details of Doucet's arrival when they were at a bar. Meanwhile, that very media outlet was stationed at the airport terminal, cameras primed to record his arrival. Opposite them stood a bank of payphones, where Gary lingered in disguise as he conversed with his best friend. Wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses to avoid recognition, Gary maintained his cover. As Doucet approached, Plauché concluded his call with the words, "Here he comes. You're going to hear a shot." Doucet sauntered past the news crews, indifferent to their cameras filming him, yet the cameras caught something he had missed. As he continued, he encountered a charging Plauché, who fired a close-range shot into the right side of Doucet's head. Doucet collapsed onto the pavement, and within moments the accompanying police detail restrained Plauché and wrestled the pistol from his hand. Amid the chaos, an arresting officer could be heard shouting the infamous words of, "Why, Gary? Why?" Doucet slipped into a coma and was placed on life support. He was maintained until the following day to enable medical staff to harvest healthy organs. Afterwards, his life support was turned off, and Jeffrey Doucet died on March 17, 1984. Gary Plauché was arrested and held in prison awaiting trial. Meanwhile, the live broadcast of the attack stunned viewers nationwide. What followed for Gary was an overwhelming surge of public attention and resounding support. His defense attorneys argued for probation by asserting that Plauché had been driven into a state of temporary insanity and extreme emotional distress upon learning what had been done to his son. Defense psychologists supported this claim, with reports indicating that Doucet possessed the ability to psychologically and sexually manipulate others, and that he had wedged his way into the already divided Plauché family by exploiting the fact that Gary and June were separated and about to divorce. Dr. Edward Uzi, who examined Gary, noted that the man was so distraught he could no longer distinguish right from wrong when he killed Doucet. Meanwhile, June had informed her children about their father's actions. While Jody claimed he sat in stunned silence, one of his siblings summed up the sentiment shared by many observers with a single word: good. Gary Plauché was initially charged with second-degree murder, but due to overwhelming public support and the mitigating circumstances of the case, the charge was reduced to manslaughter. Plauché pleaded no contest and was sentenced to a suspended 7-year jail term. In addition, he received 5 years of probation and was ordered to complete 300 hours of community service. In practice, Gary served about 3 days in jail, from the day of his arrest on Friday until his bail was posted the following Monday. He never reoffended and lived out the remainder of his life as a free man. He died in 2014, following a stroke he'd suffered 3 years earlier, which had significantly weakened his health. As his health declined, Gary Plauché was interviewed about the incident, and he never once expressed remorse for his actions. When asked shortly before his death whether he regretted killing Doucet, Plauché's answer was brief and resolute: hell no. A similar sentiment was echoed by his former wife, June. When interviewed in her later years about her ex-husband's actions, Jody's mother delivered an equally uncompromising statement. Gary had an angel sitting on his shoulder. It's not right to kill? Come talk to me for a minute. I'll give you the details. Then tell me how you'd feel about it. In the aftermath, Jody Plauché struggled to cope with the trauma of his experiences. Later, he revealed, with the benefit of his experience and a controlled state of mind, that he was deeply upset when he learned that Jeff, as he called him, had died. Only 11 years old, Jody had been progressively groomed by his abuser, beginning with minor transgressions that steadily escalated until they culminated in kidnapping. Along the way, Doucet offered his victim what seemed like kind gestures, trips to the cinema, dinners at restaurants, and visits to shopping malls. At the time, Jody was excelling in karate, and Doucet was a man trusted not only by the boy but his parents. Jody idolized his mentor, and at such a young age, especially under Doucet's coercive control, he could not have grasped the full extent to which he was being preyed upon. Over the years, however, Jody made peace with his experience and moved on. He earned a bachelor's degree from Louisiana State University and went on to become a sexual trauma counselor. Later, he received a Governor's Award for survivor activism and authored a book about his ordeal entitled Why Gary Why. In the book, he shared his perspective on the events and called for increased awareness of child abuse and trauma recovery. Jody also discussed his inability to speak out about the abuse, explaining that he was firmly under the manipulative influence of his abuser and had lied to his parents out of fear that Doucet would be released and seek retribution. He revealed another reason for his silence before the abuse was confirmed by medical tests by admitting that he suspected his father would kill Doucet. In the years since, and now as an adult, Jody has maintained that he would have preferred his abuser to be sentenced to life in prison than be put to death. Gary and June appeared not to share his sentiments. Jody continues to speak with admirable honesty about his brutal experiences on various podcasts, recounting with remarkable candor and detail the events of his abduction. He also confronted the childhood guilt he carried over the abuse and the confusion he felt about being subjected to such treatment while remaining so closely emotionally attached to his tormentor. Like his father, Jody held a measure of sympathy for Doucet, who claimed to the police that he too had been trafficked by his mother when he was a child. During his abduction, Doucet took the boy to his mother's home in Port Arthur, Texas, and convinced her to give him money, as well as to call June Plauché to reassure her that Jody was in the company of her son, so there was no need to worry about his safety. Jody did not blame Doucet's mother for this, explaining that she had been misled by her son just as he, his own parents, and possibly other victims had been. The killing of Doucet strained the relationship between the boy and his father for several months as Jody struggled to come to terms with the abuse and its aftermath. Over time, however, the relationship healed, and Jody later explained that he understood his father's actions just as his father had come to understand their consequences. Being Catholic, having taken a human life, his first thoughts were that he was going to hell, and he was okay with that. Jody mentions that a local priest later washed Gary's feet, granting him spiritual absolution for his deed and helping him move on mentally. Thank you for watching.